Newsradio 700 WLW.
You walk into any restaurant today in any town anywhere, and what you see invariably is a rather young host or hostess, somebody in their mid to late teens, maybe even younger than that, maybe in high school. So should they really be the point person at a restaurant, or should it be the owner that's out there or the manager that's out there working the front desk and enforcing this? Who really has to be the mask police if we are indeed returning to normalcy? And frankly, over the last year, we've all had to do it here ourselves. Standing by who knows all these things is someone who's been on my show before, good guest of this show. Quentin Brogdon is a fellow in the invitation-only International Academy of Trial Lawyers, a fellow in the invitation-only American College of Trial Lawyers, a fellow in the invitation-only International Society of Barristers. Man, that's a lot of secret handshakes. He's standing by right now, though. Quentin Brogdon, how are you on this glorious Monday?
Good morning, Ken. Happy Monday to you. I think you hit the nail on the head. These employees, sometimes, as you said, young employees, maybe working a summer or college job, are being asked to be on the front line of enforcing these policies as governors, both Republican and Democratic governors, are racing to lift restrictions. And masks, whether we like it or not, for at least some of the population have become a political statement. So you can't have been out in public much or looked at much social media without seeing either firsthand or on social media people who have reacted, sometimes quite violently, to being asked to put on a mask.
Yeah.
And so the irony, I think we've talked about this, is sometimes businesses want regulation. They don't want to be the ones having to say, this is our requirement. They'd much rather say, here is the requirement.
Right. But to the practical point that you just made, and I alluded to in the introduction, it should not be some 16, 17, 15, 14-year-old kid that's in front of this stand that's trying to make, they're making minimum wage or they're in college and they're trying to get some spending money. And just because they're all dressed in black does not necessarily mean that they're authoritarian or that they should be placed in a position where they have to enforce whatever the rules are of that establishment or the rules are of that local state government. This, again, falls back on the people that run these establishments. Would you agree?
That's right. And nobody who's had a kid in college or high school, and I did, I know your listeners have, almost all of them, wants their kid out there on the front line having to wrestle someone down or be the subject of force of any kind because someone doesn't want to wear a mask, and the employee, the kid, is enforcing a policy. So no, of course not. It's horrible policy to have this sort of patchwork where these kids many times are having to enforce the owner's policies one way or the other. As I said, these mask wearing has become a political statement. People I've heard are actually, there are lists circulating of businesses that require masks and don't require masks, and depending on somebody's leaning, they go to those establishments or decline to go to other establishments that don't fall in line with what they believe. So it's a mess. That's not a legal analysis. That's just a practical analysis.
Well, I since the mask mandate came out, and again, it was fuzzy at the beginning. We found out that Anthony Fauci was lying at the beginning about don't bother wearing a mask, they're not needed, lying in the sense that he did not want this rush to the stores and buying these masks. He later admitted that. But ever since that time, I've worn one. I felt it empowered me to a point where, I'm fighting this invisible enemy. I don't know what else I can do. Okay, I'll do this, and maybe I'm doing my part. And that's what I did by choice. I'm very much a libertarian when it comes to these things, particularly if there's no law governing it. And you're seeing it lifted in a lot of states. The governor in this state, a Republican in Ohio, said that if indeed we continue down the path that we're on right now, which looks like a path to light at the end of the tunnel, that maybe in 7 or 8 weeks we can get back to that sense of normalcy and not having to mask up. So I'm very much someone that wants to follow the law and somebody that also wants to maintain, my civil rights and my civil liberties. But I agree with you. It's been so political that I worry about in some of these restaurants where these kids are out at the front table or at the front stand. I worry about if they choose not to enforce it. Some they can't enforce it to begin with. Could their employer hold them liable and fire them over it for not enforcing the mask policy? Could a 40-year-old manager, fire a 15-year-old kid on a part-time job because he or she does not enforce it? Where would that fall legally?
Well, I think it's analogous to situations where, if you've got kids waiting tables or bartending or doing something in a restaurant and somebody walks the bill, and I've been involved in litigation, one case in particular where a woman ran out and chased the customer and was run over and killed by the customer. Wow. In a car. And the issue was whether that employer had properly trained its employees. It was a national chain of restaurants to avoid putting themselves in danger. So as an employer, you never want your employees taking steps to enforce any policy, whether it's shoplifting or walking a check in a restaurant or anything that puts them in danger. So if you, as an employer, are going to require your employees to enforce this or any other policy, you better be training them that it is not worth any personal jeopardy or risk to you, and stand down. If somebody makes a big fuss about this, call a manager and de-escalate and do not do this at any risk to yourself.
Yeah, I think that's the way any good business, restaurant or otherwise, would instruct their employees that first and foremost, your personal safety is paramount, whether it's through health or through confrontation or anything else. But we all know, you and I both know, I don't know if we all know, but you and I both know that it doesn't always operate that way. So what right does, and I'm sure there's some parents that are listening right now that have kids that work restaurants, what right does that kid have, absent of the parent in the work environment, have when it comes to this particular situation? What should the kid do other than listen to what the manager says or try to do the best he or she can? What right do they have, and what should that kid do, in your opinion, if you were guiding them in that situation when you do have this confrontation, either running out on a bill or walking into a restaurant and somebody simply is giving them a rough time about masking up?
Well, the first thing you have to understand is your rights will vary depending upon which one of the 50 states you're in. Employment law, much of it is controlled at the state level, and there are federal laws and regulations as well. But just as a general common sense proposition, particularly if it's a student working in a job that's not their permanent job, in the example we keep using here, you and I can, no job is worth risk to your life. Well, even if you're not a student, don't be put in a position, don't let management or anybody else, an employer, require you to do something that makes you uncomfortable and makes you feel like you are being put at risk. And so the first step, short of just walking off the job, is just politely but firmly saying, this is making me uncomfortable. I feel being put in physical jeopardy by enforcing this policy. So raise a concern first orally, but if that gets nowhere, then in writing. As far as law and legal situations, it's always better to put something in writing, respectfully but firmly. The way this policy is playing out and the way I'm being asked to enforce it, I feel is putting me and the other employees in physical danger. And then if that doesn't work, then ultimately you have the remedy of leaving the job. People don't want to hear that, but a legal remedy, hiring a lawyer and going through all of that, many times I think many of your listeners will be surprised to hear this, counseling people not to file a lawsuit, not to take legal steps, but just to get out of the situation. Mm-hmm. Often, much more often than people would realize, that is the quickest, best, most effective solution in life, whether it's a bad landlord or whatever it may be. Get away from the situation if you can. Extricate yourself with the least legal or other risk.
Quentin Brogdon, our guest, he is a lawyer. You've been invited to a lot of places, man. I don't know how you get all these invitations. I can't even get invited to a party. You got all these secret handshakes in these societies you belong to. I can't, really, keeping up with all the handshakes and the oaths, I don't know how you do it.
Well, maybe I've snookered a few people over the years. Who knows? The cynic's mindset.
Let's take a step away from just lawyer for a moment. This basically is, I think, opinion and just where the country is going with all of this. Eventually, one would hope, when we get to some sort of herd immunity, either through vaccination, antibodies, whatever it may be, whatever that number may be. I know it's a moving number. It started out at 60, it may be 80% of the country now, but regardless of all of that, when we get there, and we will get there, you're going to have some people that simply aren't going to want to take a mask off. They just feel like it protects them. As I said, I used it just as a point of comfort, even though it really didn't protect me. It was protecting somebody else. But as we get to that point where things are back to normalcy, and we still have people that want to do that, how do you think society is going to view people that don't want to do that? The libertarians in the world, where there is no, absolute rule that says, or law that says you have to wear one. We see it in states. We see it in Texas. We see it in Florida. I'm just wondering, when we get there with the rest of the country, how do you think we behave as a society?
Well, the impact, psychological and otherwise, of this pandemic is not going to go away. If everything, let's say the virus is completely wiped out, if you will, by herd immunity, 6 months from now, hypothetically speaking. The psychological impact and some of the legal ramifications as well won't immediately go away. And so it's going to take time, sort of like people going through a war, World War I, World War II, the Great Depression. People who lived through those kinds of historical events, they continue to talk about them and think about them and let it affect their behavior for decades. Yeah. People who grew up in the Great Depression are very, as a group, many of them are now dying off, unfortunately, but very miserly, some would say, and very concerned about resources and the fact things may go away tomorrow, because they remember, vividly what it was like living through a depression. I think likewise this pandemic has scarred folks psychologically, everybody, all of us, and it's not going to go away tomorrow. And so we're seeing this play out in real time. Anthony Fauci said, I think over the weekend or the end of last week, that they may be moving to 3 feet distancing, or at least he teased that, instead of 6 foot. So I think the guidance is going to change as herd immunity becomes the norm, and the restrictions will be relaxed, and over time it will become more accepted, a loosening of things. And it's not 100% risk or 0% risk. It's now viewed more as a continuum where people will decide the degree of risk they want to take. Do they want to get on a plane? Do they want to go eat out? Do they want to walk in a shopping mall? They will get to decide.
Yeah, and some would say that's the way it should have been all along. But,
True.
I think
there is a vocal minority who says that. Maybe not even a minority, a vocal segment. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Quentin Brogdon, man of 1,000 handshakes and invitations. Always great having you on. Thank you so much for your time. Stay well, okay?
You stay well as well, Karen. Thank you.